This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. We're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us.
In an ironic way, is like being very concise. Again, it's like less is more.
Less is more.
Less is more. Less is more, man. Things can be simple.
The less elements you have, the more space they could have around them, and the more you can hear their personality.
And if you choose wisely, you can save yourself an enormous amount of work versus trying to do everything.
The work I do is all in the creative field, but I genuinely believe all the concepts in this video apply to everyone, even if you aren't a creative at all. So although I'll be using design language as the vessel to explain, this stretches far beyond those limits. And with proper practice, this becomes a way to approach living your life more intentionally, but we'll get to that in a bit. The reason the idea for this video even came to be is thanks to an Uber ride I was in. The radio was playing and Billie Eilish's song Lunch came on. And even if her music isn't your style, there's a special skill that her and her brother have mastered: the art of curation. The album is 10 songs with a runtime of 44 minutes, but packs a punch as an auditory experience. I have no doubt that they have thousands of minutes worth of unreleased songs in the vault, yet they chose only these specific songs to create a cohesive narrative. And think about what it did for me. 3 months after the release, without even realizing it, their underlying decision-making left a lasting mark on me. You could replace Billie Eilish in this example with Pink Floyd or The Strokes or any number of other artists. The point is, what we're not hearing on any of these projects directly contributes to the potency of what we do hear. And I'm not saying that short albums are good and long albums are bad, but I would much prefer listening to a well-curated 40-minute album over an 80-minute album that has half filler. Both have the same amount of good songs, but one is a way more compelling, lasting art piece. I've spoken in other videos about the idea that what you choose not to include in anything is just as important as what you do choose to include. A design with too many elements or an edit with overbearing sound design ends up taking away from the intended effect on the viewer. Starting to see the lack of elements as deliberate omission rather than space that has to be filled is the mark of a more refined artist. What I see in a lot of beginners is the instinct to throw everything on the canvas because more must mean better. And I don't blame anyone for trying this. I did this when starting out. But more does not mean better, more means more. And without intention, it quickly devolves into a mess. With all of this in mind, there are 3 methods we're going to go through that have helped me improve on these skills over the years. The first being, it's important to expand on what I just mentioned about throwing everything on the canvas. This is not a bad practice at all, and actually the entire point of getting it out of your system is to encourage doing exactly that. I still do this to some degree on nearly every single project because I have to try before knowing if I like it or not. If you know how something will turn out every single time, that means you aren't really trying new things to push out of your comfort zone, and so you aren't really growing. However, stopping here is where the mistake lies. The part that separates a good artist from a great artist is self-awareness and the ability to edit what you've done. This doesn't mean harshly ridicule yourself if something didn't work out as you had hoped, but instead practicing stepping back from the piece and asking yourself, is this really what I'm going for? If you're making a statement you want to stick with the viewer, do you really need all of these elements to leave an impact, or could some parts be simplified to make the message clearer? What if we went with something like this instead? Again, just like the album example, simpler does not always mean better. But by exposing yourself to this practice of adding and then subtracting, you're actually learning twice as fast. This iterative process not only allows you to try more new things, but also starts to redefine the idea of what failing actually is. Doing something that doesn't work and then removing it is the creative process, not a mark of failure. So what does this actually look like? This could be editing a sequence and then cutting out unnecessary lines to keep it flowing. This could be designing a graphic and then removing half of the distracting elements. This could be as simple as making a playlist that fits a certain mood and then changing the amount and order of the songs to convey that even better. This way of thinking doesn't just apply to design and editing, this applies to everything you do. And when you start to think like this, you develop a knack for identifying what adds value and what detracts value in both your work and life. Let's push this even more. The questions you ask are directly related to your level of self-awareness. We've already established a good one in the last part with, is this really what I'm going for? But we can take this practice a lot further. What we're aiming to do here is find a system to self-critique ourselves. And as it so happens, this in itself is an example of quality over quantity. It isn't helpful to just ask dozens of questions that don't actually get to the root of what you're doing. Is this good? Is this bad? Those are just basic yes or no questions that don't get to the why behind it all. So instead, before even asking a question, let's define what we're looking for. Within any creative project, there's always an element of storytelling, even on the smallest scale. Let's take this animation I posted on my Instagram last year. On the surface, it's just a bike traveling through different scenes before it loops. There isn't Christopher Nolan level writing here, but that's exactly why I want to use this as an example. Even on a seemingly arbitrary piece, my intent is to tell a bite-sized story. I could say behind the animation is the motif of a progressing journey through the world and the sense of freedom that comes with adventure. Or it's just pretty textures and colors. Ultimately, it's up to the viewer to decide what they get from it. But for me, when I was creating this, the questions I was asking myself were a reflection of how I felt at the time. Let's take this windmill scene right here. Without the color palette, it looks like this. Not bad, but not what I was going for. So in this scenario, I might ask myself, where does it feel this windmill is located? The footage reminds me of a warm summer traveling through Europe, and so leaning the colors into a more nostalgic, warm postcard style puts me there. Notice how the question I asked myself here has to do with both the storytelling and emotional resonance of the piece, not just, is this good? I know it sounds silly to analyze a basic animation in this way, but it's the honest truth. I cared for this piece when making it, and so I treated it with the same level of sincerity I would a much bigger project. This entire example might seem like a detour from the idea of less is more, but it's really not. The type of questioning that led me to add that windmill color palette is the exact same type of questioning that led me to remove elements from the visuals. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many context-dependent questions that you could ask yourself from project to project, such as, what emotion do I want to evoke with this piece? How does this element contribute to the overall message? Is there a simpler way to convey this idea? How would this scene look like from a different perspective? What assumptions am I making about my audience? What memories does this work bring up for me? This kind of self-awareness is the language of design, but at the same time, you could adapt these questions to your own relationships and daily decisions. Hopefully you're starting to see what I meant earlier, that becoming a more thoughtful creative and living intentionally go hand in hand. I want to take a second to thank you guys for the support on the last 2 sponsored videos. It's allowed me to do things like rent out this studio and to just keep making content in general. As I've said before, I'm only willing to take sponsors from brands that I actually use, and so once again, this video is sponsored by Artlist. Since I'm such a strong believer in the idea of less is more, the elements that you do choose to add need to be of the highest quality, which is exactly why I've chose Artlist for years. If you've enjoyed the music and sound design up to this point in the video, that's because it's from their massive library of assets. Being able to create knowing I have access to thousands of options allows me to really explore conveying the emotional message of any piece that I work on. I get asked often to share my personal sound library, but the truth is it's almost entirely from Artlist. And so because of this, I made a collection of every single sound effect used in this video so that after you sign up with my link, you can browse through and download them for your own work. And if you're wondering how I actually sound design, well, I actually made a whole video on that too, which I'll link below. What I find great is that they're always updating their library with new assets. Just recently, they created a Sounds of Determination collection, working with Paralympic athletes to record them in action. It's pretty fascinating, and I actually used some of the sounds from that collection in this video. They have a variety of plans depending on your needs as a creator, and if you use my link to sign up for an annual plan, you get 2 months for free, and of course have access to all of those sound effect collections that I mentioned. Everything will be linked in the description below. All right, let's move on to one of my favorite methods for practicing better curation. This last method is a fun one and has a lot of practical use beyond just becoming better at decision making. I'm calling this the Chopped method because of the legendary cooking show, Chopped.
Welcome to Chopped, chefs.
The premise of the show is the contestants are given a mystery box with a few random ingredients and they have to use all of them in the dish that they make. You might see where I'm going with this. This would be like picking 3 elements or constraints for your project. So for motion design, you get 1 icon, 1 texture, and it has to be low frame rate. Or a variation for editing could be the footage has to be black and white, a weird font for the titles, and a specific sound effect that you have to use at least once. The entire point is to force you to think outside of the box with what you have. What's important is that you're setting the rules, so it's really on you to follow them yourself. Not fully embracing the limitations diminishes the entire purpose of this challenge. So when putting yourself up to it, pick things that you actually want to practice with. If you feel like you're not really great with text layout and animation, your constraints should be that your next edit has to have at least 3 text titles. This builds accountability for your learning in the process, and I promise that when you pull off something that you initially thought was impossible, it's a fantastic feeling.
Are you feeling pumped up for this?
I especially like this as a challenge because so often I see people fall down the rabbit hole of buying gear and plugins and presets rather than experimenting with what they already have. I'm all for adding tools to your arsenal, but if you're doing so to avoid really learning, well, I think you might be leaving a lot of potential on the table. And in all honesty, if you're planning to work with clients, being able to adapt within set constraints is a hell of a skill to have. Think about it. Clients are the ones bringing you the mystery box with their branding and project guidelines. So the better you are at getting creative with what you're given, the better you'll be at working with others as well. I'll end with this. There is no timeline on getting there. You won't one day wake up and all of a sudden have perfect decision-making abilities. That just doesn't exist. This is a continual practice that takes time and is forever a part of developing who you are as both a creative and a person. So because of that, I want you to walk away with these 2 final takeaways. The first is, once again, to not be overly harsh with yourself when things aren't turning out how you had hoped. This is meant to be an iterative process, remember that. And second, sometimes your own critique just does not work. You may be stuck or you're too emotionally attached to the project to see things clearly. If you feel that's the case, then get feedback from others, but with an open and receptive mindset. The worst thing you can do is ask for advice and then get defensive when someone is just being honest or trying to help you. Why I believe all of this is important is what I've stated throughout this entire video. Living intentionally matters and has the ability to branch into every aspect of your life, work and otherwise. The principle of less is more only truly works when you're deliberate about understanding why it matters and what it means for you. It's not just about reducing or simplifying, it's about making conscious choices that align with who you are and who you want to become. Before you leave, my next video is one that I've been working on for several months and should be out soon. It's the most cinematic piece that I've ever made, and I think that if you got something valuable from this video, you'll really enjoy that one even more. So make sure to subscribe to know when that goes live. And of course, it's worth mentioning that my editing and animation masterclass, Frame by Frame, has dozens of hours worth of lessons just like this one, covering everything from animation to script writing, shooting, editing, and the entire post-production process. My brother Nathaniel Drew and I spent a year putting everything we know into it. So if you're interested in learning more, I'll leave a link below, along with a discount code that'll get you 10% off on whatever you choose. All right, see you soon.